very happy to introduce our first speaker of today, Martin Charter, who is Director of the Center for Sustainable Design at the University College for Creative Arts in UK. And his center is undertaking an attempt to identify and classify so-called makers and fixers. And well, we are very curious about what the results about this searching makers and fixers and how that relates to the future of our industry. So, Martin, I give you the floor.
So, thank you very much, Dirk, for the introduction. So, yeah, I'm the director of something called the Center for Sustainable Design that was set up in 1995, but I also have a role as co-chair of a sustainability working group across what is now University for the Creative Arts. That's the second largest provider of graduates to the creative industry in Europe. And we've made a fairly radical decision that over the next 2 to 3 years, every creative course from photography through fine arts to architecture and product design will need to have some sort of module on sustainability. So this is about integration as well. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to go a little bit big picture to start off with and then drill down into some of the issues that I hope will be relevant. So post-2008, we saw the sort of re-emergence of discussions around green economy and green growth. We saw the World Economic Forum, we saw UNEP and OECD publishing their variety of reports that's now filtered down into policy-making agendas, you know, whether it is a government level or city level. We're seeing the emergence of job titles, even with green growth, green economy in it. And the words are feeding through into a variety of different, you know, fora, if you like. We even have the Global Green Growth Forum every year now in Copenhagen and other initiatives. You know, being presented as a sort of alternative Davos. So green growth, you know, on the agenda. And of course, over the last sort of 20 years, we've seen, you know, climate change, you know, up and down on the agenda, particularly in the sort of 2000s, in the noughties, if you like, heavy focus on low carbon, etc., etc. And indeed, this is now sort of morphing into climate change resilience, adaptability. It is there, so we have to adapt to it. Although we still, of course, you know, have a series of particularly US-based climate change deniers. So we haven't necessarily fully done the argument yet. So we've still got what I term the islands of anti out there. It's not a done deal everywhere. So we got, you know, obviously climate change, and indeed moving towards November next year, we've got the sort of Paris Climate Change Summit, which will hopefully be looking to reset the Kyoto goals. And even now, Leonardo DiCaprio has been brought in as a UN peace envoy to raise the visibility of the issue. So I think my point there is I think we're going to see another wave of media interest running up to November next year. So I think we're going to see more climate change related stuff emerging on our TV sets again. But the area that perhaps has emerged a lot more, again, somewhere between 2008 to 2010, is this whole area of resource productivity and resource efficiency, driven by, you know, a lot of the issues to do with access to critical metals, but also the whole idea of how we use our materials much more efficiently. So a re-emergence in the sense of this idea of the circular economy, that has existed in certain countries as a concept for some time, and even China have, from 2008, a circular economy promotion law. So essentially, you know, and many of you, of course, will be well wedded to this, we're moving away from this sort of the mantra of the linear economy based on sort of take, make, waste. And we're seeing a number of initiatives emerging looking at that whole idea. And notably, Elaine MacArthur Foundation, we have the Madonna Braungart initiatives. And coming out of that, we have the idea of designing stuff for the biological system, but also the technical system. So, but I think particularly looking at the technical system, we're still in a lot of misuse often of the language. In the UK at the moment, we're seeing a growing interest in remanufacturing. So we've had two of the politicians, the Tory politicians, launching their own initiatives on remanufacturing. And we may even see something called Remade in Britain emerge as a new initiative because of the potential links to jobs. But we're getting, even in some of those fora, people mixing remanufacturing with repair, with refurbishment. And I think we need to understand that sort of designing for remanufacturing is complex, it's a business model, and that's very different from reupholstering a chair or repairing a bit of electronics. So I think we perhaps need to start to sort out this terminology a bit more clearly, because I think certainly the policymakers seem to be slightly confused as well, I'd say. So we've seen these issues, and for those who are perhaps less aware of that, particularly in the remanufacturing model, it really is a business model. It's reconfiguring, often through the use of services, through leasing, and often you can see sectors like photocopiers embedded this model, and companies like Xerox claim they get 8 lives out of certain platforms for their products by designing in upgradability, but as a system design. So you have to bring in design, manufacturing, logistics, etc. It's a system design. It's not easy. And that is perhaps how I characterize the circular economy at the moment. Lots of interesting little examples, but we don't have this really nice picture yet, as some present. It's still disconnected. That's, of course, what we're aiming for, if you understand my abstract thinking here, but that picture is not there yet. We've got a long way to go. We've got to have to redesign systems at many different levels. So behind this all, and I'll refine and go down into what we're terming making, modifying and fixing, we're seeing the discussion, and I think the Commission is going to push it more, this idea of the new industrial renaissance. So this new potential spirit of experimentation, linking very much with some of the comments that Dirk was making. Maybe they're slightly thinking of it in a different way, much more top-down, but the way we're seeing it is this potentially higher level of experimentation happening, driven by essentially more access to information and decentralization. And further behind this, the world is very different to 10 to 15 years ago. Who would believe that Google was launched in 1999? For some in the room, it's just been there for the whole life, virtually. But for some of us who can even remember having clunky computers in our maths lessons that didn't really effectively work. So there's pervasive access to information, anytime, anywhere, different from 10, 15, 20 years ago. Social networking technologies, Facebook, very disruptive technology, whatever it is, nearly a quarter of the world's population on it. Massive, huge, only 10 years old. But it's there to stay. The players may change, but this need to share information, to collaborate, is being facilitated by these social networking technologies. So information, sharing, collaboration. We also have open sourcing of information, either deliberately or in effect indirectly. Manuals for mobile phones suddenly emerging in Asia and then going onto the net. So even Apple will perhaps find it difficult, and others who have been very protective over their technology, difficult to protect increasingly, as people get smarter and smarter about, hacking products or data. So open sourcing of information and designs. Good example, we at our event, at least one who was at that we ran on Makers and Fixers. So a Reading hackerspace. They talked about somebody brought a pram or a baby, a stroller that was broken into their hackerspace. And, what they then did is open source the missing component and then 3D printed the component to extend the life of the product. So you can start to see how some of these things can start to join up. I jumped ahead a little bit there. But so it's open sourcing of designs, but also you even see some of the big players like Nike starting to open source some of their IP around sustainable materials, because there's a belief in the open innovation world that it may lead to other innovation. By releasing, you may lead to other ripple effects of creating other new innovation in particularly your supply chains. We've got new tools, so information, networking and sharing. And we've got also new tools emerging, much more accessible. 3D printing coming, the price coming down, and we will see, improvements in the technology. And we have our first sets of 3D printers that can use recycled plastics or recyclate and bioplastics, biopolymers. So they're starting to emerge as well. So new tools. Also, importantly, in my opinion, new places and spaces that are coming and emerging where people are getting together outside of the virtual world to physically share information, but to have those lateral connections you can only have by physically meeting people. And I think this is quite a big thing, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So, are we at a point of transformation or transition? Revolution of evolution, somebody who started my sustainability activities, in various forms in the late 80s, I feel that something is happening. Something is starting to change over the last 3 to 5 years. And in running my conference, I run a Sustainable Innovation Conference next year with the 20th year, I'm feeling we've moved from this sort of why to do to then what we need to do to now how we do. Something's changing. It's in certain circles still. It's not everywhere, but something's changing. And so there's this idea of change, in the air, I think. And is that going to come top down or is it going to come bottom up? Having been involved in the pre-meeting for the Global Green Growth Forum, which was set up originally to look at a nice balanced thing about big government, big business and civil society. From my engagement in that, it seemed to be civil society seems to have got edited out of the discussion. But certainly what we've seen in our Sustainable Innovation conferences is it's the civil society area where we're starting to see more of the innovation emerging, in my opinion. But a lot of these big partnerships seem to be editing out civil society, at least in my observation. So is it going to come top down or bottom up, or is it going to be a combination of two, or in a new system that somehow facilitates, the top facilitates the bottom? So, and will this activity potentially lead to more sort of incremental innovation or potentially more disruptive and new forms of innovation coming in different forms? I personally believe that we are, because of all those, the access to information, the collaboration, the tools, and a sense of wanting to get things done, we are going to see more mobilisation of what some have called people power to do things. Will this then ripple out into communities and then even the crowd? And again, there's an interesting thing that I haven't still worked through between working virtually and people physically coming together, and the power and how we use the strength of both, in a sense, worlds. Certainly some of the stuff we've been looking at in terms of smart cities and smart towns, a lot of the discussion there seems to be very much top-down about technological experiments and forgetting people in those towns and cities, and forgetting to engage people, in the discussions. On the positive side, we've seen places like Copenhagen really starting to work on how they facilitate bottom-up innovation from communities and neighbourhoods through using different types of events. It sounds very basic, but it's quite a lot of thinking behind what they're doing there. So, behind this sense of an emerging we're going to do it attitude, not amongst everybody, but amongst certain people. We're going to do it because we want to, because we can't rely on the big society, as unfortunately David Cameron called it in Britain. We have to be more resilient. And as an example I had from a colleague at another event, the son coming up to the father saying, "Can you give me some more money to repair my car?" And he said, "Sorry, I don't have any more money. You've got to fix it yourself. You've got to learn to fix." So there's an economic necessity emerging, you know, to do some of this stuff. So there's a can-do-it mentality. And, you know, even silly things like the Lego movie, the construction products are coming back, you know, being used in the home again. Is this going to start to engender a new building, construction, hands-on type of mindset? We have behind us also, civil society groups emerging that are starting to open up the whole life cycle. And this is a story of stuff who I imagine many of you have seen, 3 million hits, viral video, opening up the consumption production system, but also highlighting what I'm terming now the Voldemort of business sustainability, which is built-in product obsolescence. That issue that cannot be talked about, particularly in corporate circles. But I believe we're going to start to see more civil society reaction to built-in product obsolescence, because it is in certain types of products by design or not. Components that have a finite lifetime, that will break down simply after a finite lifetime. The death chips in printers. People are starting to get pissed off with this. So I've seen some indications already, that we're going to start to possibly see a reaction to this, I think. And I think as we see the expansion of the repair cafes that we come in, now 700 worldwide, 200 more since May, people are going to get back into products and understand how they're made and how they're not. Any of you who've ever done a disassembly exercise and then tried to reassemble the product, you know, they're not designed to do that. But we can do that. So what we're starting to see, this emergence of what we're thinking of a maker, modifier and fixer movement. And I'll come back to what I mean by modification. And again, this is hitting, you know, wide and very influential magazines around the world. Opinion formers, we have these maker fairs with, you know, emerging all around the world. And there was even a maker fair in the White House grounds about 6 to 9 months ago. And even the emergence of new terms, fixperts, fixing experts or repairers. And within this, we're also starting to see in the repair and fixing area new business models starting to emerge. So, for example, before I go into some of those examples, more examples of people starting to look at waste and adding value to that waste. So this is the Freitag bags, 2 Swiss designers who saw lorries going past on the Autobahn and thought, what happened to those tarpaulins on the lorries when they went to landfill? And they found you just went straight to landfill, a lot of good material, cut the elements out, you can create very unique bags. So they essentially have products that are sold, very successful, but made from waste. And also in the Museum of Modern Art as a modern day design classic. And made in Europe. So we'll come back to that one. iFixit, unfortunately made in the US, but hopefully this could be a business opportunity for somebody in Europe. So that essentially, very interesting guy, ex-Apple engineer, around about 2003, said, I want to develop a repair manual for every product on the planet. Once he stated that, he started to think, well, I've actually got to find some way of funding myself to do that. So he's developed an incredibly sophisticated mechanism, which is very clearly thought through. Essentially, they produce very high quality online tutorials that will teach you as an individual how to diagnose your problem with your product. And then they sell you the spares and the tools to fix your own product. They're getting things like 3 million hits on their site. We found another example of this, eSpares in the UK, similar point. Essentially, you're educating the consumer to help themselves. Other examples, Subgroup. This is a fast setting rubber that can be used to fix, frayed wires on mobile phones and other things. But again, it's extending the life of the product, Restart. This is, again, is a mobile repair cafe approach that comes in to repair products. But importantly, getting down to this, we're seeing the emergence now of places and spaces where people are physically coming together to make, modify and fix. Initially kicked off with the Fab Labs in MIT around the early 2000s, very sophisticated, very organised, a lot of equipment, digital fabrication. Makerspaces emerging, still organised, still roughly 9 to 5, but essentially a technical school in Rotterdam, here at RDM campus as an example, opening up their facilities to the local community to go in, to experiment, to make prototypes and job produce. It's an existing capacity that's been opened up to the community. And there are thousands of these in Europe already. Much less formalised than the Fab Labs, but they're still organised. So you pay a rent to use the equipment. Next level down is much more informal activities, and we've drilled down into research, primary research in this, hacker spaces. Much more informal. Maybe it's 8 to 12 at night, a couple of times a week. Mainly guys in sheds type of mentality. So heavy male orientation at the moment. The guy gets the permission from the wife for the night out, with the other guys with a beer and a pizza, but essentially getting hold of some electronics, starting to mess around with it, make some products. But our primary research said also people are modifying products, they're changing the function of the product, and also repairing and fixing products in these hacker spaces. And you've also got a very big spectrum of interest from the hacker spaces. The retired engineering director who can't stop being an engineer, through to, let's say, much more radical people who want to live in an entirely old school 60s style. So that even those cultures existing in the same format, often these guys get, some of them got pissed off with us asking the question, what time do you close? Some of these are open 24/7, 365 days a year, and that's part of the culture. So essentially it's not just making, it's also modifying and fixing products. So changing the webcam to a microscope. The webcam that sits on top of your TV, you can change that to a microscope. And they're doing it at the moment for fun. It's a challenge to do it, but we've seen some indications that some are starting to become an incubator for some new products, which is interesting. Also, so that's, other people are calling those product hacks. Other types of product hacks are Ikea Hackers. So this is another group that is basically hacking Ikea products. And there will be other examples that are out there. Repair cafes. Started in the Netherlands about four something years ago. Ex-journalist, 700 in the world, the majority in the Netherlands, and 200 have been set up since May. We did primary research into this, and as we did with the hackerspace, and this is freely available from our site. And a very interesting point about the hackerspaces, the repair cafes, much more of a male-female split, more of a balanced profile in terms of, let's say, product coverage from clothing through to bicycle repair, through to electronics. And people are going there to fix stuff, but also they're going there to give something back to the community. So what was quite interesting, particularly in the Netherlands sample, was the age profile of the repair cafes was 50, 55 plus. So there's a lot of potential, early retirees and others getting involved to give some of their skills back to the community. Whereas the hacker spaces are much younger, and it's much more about me, what I can learn in the group. Whereas the repair cafes are much more open, providing something back. So there's quite an interesting dynamic between that. And indeed, we're putting our sort of money where our mouth is, in a sense we're, not put a £50 donation to it in terms of money, but we're setting up, co-developing and co-designing a repair cafe in Farnham with a transition town. And so we're getting our hands dirty, and tomorrow morning we've got our first test. So we're going through the realities of this. And one very interesting point that came literally this week, and I'll share it with you, just to show how things are moving. We were looking at the whole product liability insurance for this. What happens if somebody chops a finger off, type of idea. And we went to the big insurance companies, and one of the big insurance companies, Zurich Re, hadn't got a policy on this last week. This week, they had having a meeting because they had 4 repair cafe proposals on the table, and they're realising that something's happening and they've got to produce an insurance product to cover this. So it's, to me, I always listen to things like that. It's a very interesting indicator of a mainstream player starting to recognise activities emerging. So getting to closing, and hopefully I'm not too much beyond my time, is what we're now also seeing is a new type of hybrid, and we're calling it a sort of community business, although that's very loose and broad. So we've come across the Goldfinger factory in London. Essentially what they're doing is they're providing an incubator for people who want to transform wood waste into products and generate businesses. So that's one part of it. The front, you've got a retail space to sell the product, with a cafe for networking internally within the community, and then within it building in repair cafe type of facilities. So it's a sort of more integrated business, and it's both for it's for all 3 triple bottom line elements. There's a community, there's an environmental and economic element, and we've found another one of these existing, which it's called the Remakery in Brixton in London. So they're a bit of a hybrid, and my gut feel is we'll start to see more of these. Already in our Farnham thing, we've had people expressing interest in the idea of a hackerspace linked to the repair cafe. So I think we're going to see more of these hybrids emerge. So basically, I believe something's happening. I believe we're starting to see a demonstration of these things happening. I believe the physical element of people coming together, bringing that, sharing the information, that creativity that you only get when individuals come together is important. And I believe potentially in a sustainability context, before I jump into that, I believe this is coming from civil society. It's not coming from big government. It's not coming from big business. This is coming from individuals who have started to feel more empowered because of information, access to information, new tools, new places and spaces. So people is coming from civil society. I think it's going under the radar for a lot of policymakers. But within this new movement, whatever we want to call it, new shift, I think there is going to be new models looking at more potential, more localised sustainable consumption production that can play a lot more to the broader sustainability agenda. So thinking globally, acting locally, sharing the idea from Kathmandu and implementing it in Farnham. because we can now with access to information. So anyway, I hope there's a few interesting things there, and thanks very much.